along with our other sponsors today. So please go and visit them if you have time during the networking drinks. So I'd like to invite the final panel to come up now and get ready. To our moderator for this session, Llewellyn. Thank you.
Hi everybody, thanks very much for staying with us. It's been a great day today. I was just going to ask the panel first up if they could all introduce themselves and give you all their Twitter handles so that you can tweet and get all the names correct. So we'll start the discussion after that.
Sure, I'm Jennifer Rigby. My Twitter handle is @jriggers, and I am social media and special projects producer at Channel 4 News.
Hi, I'm Sean Ingle. My Twitter handle is @Sean, S-E-A-N, Ingle, I-N-G-L-E, and I'm the sports editor of Guardian.co.uk.
My name is Martin Bryant. I'm Martin SFP on Twitter. There's a story behind that which doesn't need going into now. And I'm managing editor at The Next Web, which is a technology news website.
I'm Tom Standage. I'm digital editor at The Economist, and correctly, originally, my Twitter handle is @TomStandage.
And I'm @Llewellyn with lots of L's in it. We're going to be talking about ethics and standards in journalism. And actually, we'll kick it all off with the news that we've had from the Boston Marathon stuff, because actually it's an incredible time to be talking about ethics and standards and best practice, particularly with the amount of misinformation that's spreading around. But I just want to sort of kick things off. One of the questions when I was meeting and asking people I got was, where's the tipping point between accuracy and speed? Tony, maybe we'll start with you.
Yeah, I think that's quite a hard question actually, and it's one that we've seen people go the wrong side of a lot in the last week and today as well. And I think from our point of view at Channel 4 News, we were thinking about this and we were sort of saying we obviously want to break news. We're in the business of news, so you do want to be first. But if you get it wrong, that undermines your credibility every single time, and that's factually wrong, but also things like spelling errors. You know, if you tweet something really fast and there's any problem with it, I think people immediately trust you a little bit less. So when we kind of get something in new, I think the first thing that we do, same as anyone would do, you know, with any piece of information that you get as a journalist, you try and check it and back it up. And I think that's the same with a tweet or with a Facebook post or a Google Plus post, anything like that. I mean, Twitter is generally the fastest one, so that's probably the one that I would focus on. But, you know, there's something someone said to me before I left, like, which is very sensible, but a lot of people probably ignore. If you're not totally sure, don't tweet it.
Anybody want to add more to that before?
No, I'd agree with that. I think you only have to look at Fox and CNN after they said last year that the Senate had repealed Obamacare. That wasn't true. Then they made the same mistake, saying there'd been an arrest in the Boston Marathon case this week. Again, got it wrong. While NBC, their guy held back. He said multiple sources are telling me there's been no arrest. You know, he was under quite a fierce interrogation from his own presenter, but he stuck by his story. He was proved right. And I think being right and being accurate is always more important than speed, as much as you want to spread stories.
Absolutely. Do you think these days with social media we're sacrificing accuracy?
Yeah, I think that certainly the Boston events on Monday and today have very much shown, more than any other event I can think of actually, how holding back is far more important than being first. And you know, I'm lucky enough, I suppose, in one way, to be working in technology news where we don't have to cover kind of life or death kind of situations like that. So it's not quite as, you know, if we say Google's just launched something and they haven't quite launched it yet or whatever, it's not, you know, we might look a bit silly, but, you know, it's not quite as serious. But what I've seen this week is the people who've earned my respect most have been the ones who have held back and have checked and you know, really verified what they're going to say and used multiple sources, etc., etc. And a lot of the time you find that it's actually people, the amateur, the people who maybe aren't even journalists or even, you know, wouldn't even consider themselves a blogger or anything. They're just people who I happen to follow and are now getting on the game and saying, oh, someone says this happened, or I was listening to the police scanner and they said this, and then that's how rumours spread and misinformation spreads. And so yeah, holding back is so valuable.
Tom, would you like to add your thoughts on it?
Well, yeah, The Economist doesn't really do great reviews, and so we've had it. You know, this is one of those weeks where we want to acknowledge that something's happening, but we don't really pitch in until there's something to chew on analytically. And so our modus operandi is that when there's something going on, we'll put an editor's note on the homepage saying there's a manhunt going on, but we won't do any more than that. And it's only when we've actually got some comment or analysis to add that we'll do it. So it's very useful to have social media as a sort of an extended peripheral vision. When we're making the decisions we're making, but we're not really trying to beat everyone else to the news, so it's less of an issue for us. But I think the other thing we should do on this panel is one of the things we could do is we could delegate someone in the room to just keep reloading Twitter, and then stand up in the air and yell, "They got him," when they get him or whatever happens, and that way the rest of us can just stop reloading Twitter all the time. That'd be one thing we could do. The other thing is that we're sort of all asking for trouble by agreeing to appear on a panel on ethics and standards in journalism. I mean, how much are we asking for people to go and dig into any complaints that might have been made about us or our news organisations in the past? So I would like to just sort of preface all of our remarks by saying we are not sitting here and setting ourselves up as perfect beings who have never made any kinds of mistake. And in fact, I think what would be most fun would be if we talk about things we got wrong, or decisions we found hard to make, or times when we screwed up, and just make that absolutely clear that we're not sort of we're not pretending that we have all the answers.
I will come on to that because I think there's an awful lot to be learned, because you don't really progress unless you've learned from your mistakes. But in terms of just getting the facts right in the first place, have you got sort of verification procedures or guidelines that tell you what you should be doing in these kind of situations?
Yes, do you want to go in order again?
No, just anybody pitch in whenever you feel like it. But
yeah, I mean, we do have guidelines about Twitter. They're more kind of ad hoc. I mean, we've got a policy, but as I was saying before, it kind of tends to be when things have gone wrong, or if you need to refer up, or if you need to talk to the lawyer, that kind of thing. In terms of putting out the news, I think it's the same. Our general kind of criteria is, would you say it on air? So we treat it in the same way as that. So before you would tweet something, I mean, when Margaret Thatcher died is quite a good example, because it happened quite quickly. There was sort of rumours, and then there was the statement immediately from her spokesman. And at that point, you're completely safe, and you can go with it because you've got it from the spokesman, and that's fine. So I think that's the way we treat it.
Anybody else?
Do you have people at channel? I know the BBC have, and some NGOs also have, sort of experts who can look at a picture apparently from Syria or something, and they can say, actually those number plates aren't Syrian. And they can look at the angle of a shadow and work out what kind of camel it is, or whatever. And they can say, it can't be a picture from today because the angles are all wrong, or because camels change colour in the winter, or I don't know what. So do you have? I mean, we don't have people like that at the Economist, but I know the BBC does. Do you have sort of experts you can call on to verify that?
Yeah, I mean, we don't have a team, but for situations like Syria where there's been so much citizen media, we have kind of people who've become experts, or people who, we have a Syrian translator who works in the newsroom who sort of says, well, that's obviously not true because he's not actually speaking Syrian, in this
right,
video.
They have a different accent, basically, don't they?
Yeah, things like that. And I think there's ways, we also kind of, at that point, would then go to verification experts, or one of the things that we've done kind of over, this isn't even a social media thing actually, but we've done a lot about Sri Lanka, and a lot of that has become a massive fight, on both sides. What we've reported, is it true, is it fake? And the Sri Lankan government says, oh, it's fake. But in situations like that, when things are very kind of contentious, we have huge teams of experts who would come in and look at that. But that's less of a breaking news thing.
It is. We have the same situation with the war crimes court in Bangladesh, where ultimately a judge resigned, but we were given basically intercepted material, and we had to verify that it was real, because it was people apparently deciding what they were going to do, rather than doing it in court in an open and transparent way. They were sort of cooking it all up beforehand, and so we had to satisfy ourselves that this wasn't fake, and now it's done.
Sorry, I'm slightly distracted by this. It's quite nice, actually.
Relaxing.
Yeah, we'll all nod off in a sec. Thinking about the verification thing, one of the things everybody was putting in their Twitter bios, things like retweets are not endorsements, and the whole sort of retweeting policy. It seems to me people are repeating stuff without thinking, just pressing that button. Have you got any thoughts on the...
People might be. I would suggest that most news organisations are more cautious, clearly if it comes from AP, and AP got this, Boston a restaurant as well, but if it comes from an AP or Press Association or one of the other respected news buyers, or it comes from another paper, you will take it with more, believe it more than if it's just from Joe Blogs, in Boston. So I do think we are naturally more cautious than certain people on Reddit, certainly people on Twitter who will just tweet or post anything. So we have to be, it's a reputational thing.
I'm thinking about Reddit. I mean, how do you feel about the crowdsourcing activities on Reddit? Perhaps you'd like to comment on this and the fact that they were just getting it so wrong.
It's funny. On one hand, people were saying, "Oh, this is the most amazing thing in the world. Look how amazing this crowdsourcing of sleuthing is." And I was just looking at it through my hands, going, "I can't believe you're doing this." It's like, it's a fun hobby, but to hold it up as like the future of crime investigations or something, which is getting so much attention, and yeah, so wrong. And we actually considered covering it. As a kind of news story, look what's happening, but I couldn't quite work out the right angle, because on one hand, yeah, it was this kind of like,
it's an analogy with open source, which is that with enough eyeballs, all crimes are shallow. Unfortunately, it turns out not to be true, but that was essentially the motivation, wasn't it? That in the same way that lots of people looking at some code can tell you if it's secure or not, that lots of people looking at lots of this information could, but it didn't work out that way.
It's very dangerous as well, because if you post something that's wrong, lynch mobs, the situations, tensions are high. It's incredibly irresponsible.
Extremely responsible. Thinking about that and the people involved and the impact on them. The other thing that I think ethical issues for journalists is approaching people in a breaking news situation, and how you do that, particularly if somebody's traumatised, or have you got any sort of thoughts on how that should be done, or perhaps that we need to be more considerate of the way we approach people?
Yeah, I mean, you see some horrible examples, don't you, on Twitter in situations like this, when someone's tweeted, a picture, or I can't find my family, or something like that, and then you see a journalist tweeting about like, hey, hope you're fine, can you please send me a picture? And I think it's obviously you do want their content, you want to use it, but I think the tone is really difficult in 140 characters or whatever. You can't. It's quite hard to go into detail like that. I think one of the ways to deal with it that we tend to do is put kind of, if there is something that we want to use, we start off quite vague, and we don't go into the detail of what we want or the person, and then move it off Twitter, so to email or to a direct message, just because everybody looking at this is not really appropriate. I think that's the way we tend to approach it.
Yeah, I find it's just like any other form of interaction on social media. If you're human and genuine about it, and you consider other people as you go about your business, it reaps rewards. I mean, you might be late to something, or you might get beaten to something by someone else. I mean, it's nowhere near the same. But when we're, for example, I can think of an example of. There was recently an image of Sergey Brin from Google on the New York Metro on the New York subway with Google Glass on, just sat there, surrounded by normal people. One of the most rich guys in the technology industry, just sat there with this hot technology that everyone wants to try, surrounded by normal people. It was a brilliant image, and someone just snapped it and posted it on Twitter, and it was starting to get retweeted around. And we were probably about half an hour late in publishing that, because we thought, sorry, it was amazing, but we held back, and we asked for permission, and we had to wait for a little while to get permission. We got permission, and I think maybe some other organisations didn't, but we at least could have our heads held high that we had done that, and we had, we were 100% comfortable with publishing it. And there's, especially with photographs, more than anything else, I find, if you steal a photograph, post it without permission, people, it really gets to people, it really annoys people. I don't know if that's something about photographers, but
it's a grey area though. I mean, we are incredibly conservative at The Guardian. When Rory McIlroy won the US Open, I think, he had tweeted a picture of himself, basically. The big cup was over his head. He clearly drunk pretty much all the contents. He was slightly tipsy, and tweeted it out to his 1 million followers. Now, my view was he's published something in the public domain. We should use it, and I think almost every other news organisation used that picture. But we were told by our bosses, reply, and I was saying to my bosses, look, he's on a plane somewhere. He gets billions of tweets. He's not going to reply, but they'd be very much wrong. So I think we've relaxed it slightly since. But yeah, that was the view at the time.
Sorry, I think if you could embed it, I think you have some kind of, for example, tweets, if you embed a tweet with an image, it will now, it will show up with the image in view. And so I think if you're doing that, or a YouTube video or whatever, you're at least giving full credit to the original source. And so if you can't embed it, I think that's where, for us anyway, that's where it becomes a bit more of an issue.
Yeah, and do you think it's enough to be seen to be asking, even if perhaps it wasn't a plain and couldn't reply?
Depends, I think it depends completely on the person, whether it's a public figure or whether it's, clearly if it's someone with 20 followers and they publish something that's very personal, very interesting, then that's when you should. But if it's a global superstar and they're tweeting something, I think it's pretty much fair game. They're tweeting that they're happy with that photo being out in the public domain, therefore I think it's okay to take it, obviously acknowledge where it's come from. But,
so as a general rule, guidelines going forward would be to say, always ask.
Yeah, I think you may as well ask, you're not going to lose anything. And also tell people when you use their content, because people love it. Often, what I was going to say was we quite often ask, are you in this area? Have you seen this, or can you tell us more about this, or whatever? And then those people, you already say, the moment they send something, we do this quite a lot with weather, our weather presenter loves it. Liam Dutton, he kind of always asks for people's sunsets and whatever, and obviously people love that because they love the weather. So he gets loads from them, and that kind of, you've sort of got over that hump already in a way, because they've kind of given it to him because they want it to be used. And then when he replies to them, or when we reply to them, you get all these tweets being like, we'll feature on Channel 4 News, and then they send it out to their friends. Yeah, and that's a nice way of doing it, I think.
Yeah, one of the comments that came out of the session this morning was about, somebody said, people's expectations are all over the place when it comes to what you're allowed to do and not allowed to do with their photos. What do you think you can do, perhaps to sort of clarify that for them? Any thoughts at the end?
I'm not sure. Well, we don't tend to use this very much, but my wife publishes a lot of pictures online, photos online, and she's had sites use them, and they've said, oh, because you put it on Flickr, we thought that was okay. And she said, well, hang on a minute, because Flickr does tell you, it does let you specify, the terms under which images can be used. Didn't you bother to read that? And they said, yes, but you didn't disable embedding, so we thought it must be okay. This was a photography site that champions the rights of photographers, so they're breaking it very, very simple. So photographers are very touchy about this, but I think with good reason, because there are actually quite fine-grained ways in the case of photograph to specify what can and can't be done with images. You can have CC and all that kind of stuff. Obviously, those rules don't exist with Twitter, and I think that makes it more difficult. They don't exist with other forms of media either, and so that's why asking is always a good idea.
And holding your hands up, if someone objects, if you use someone else's content and they object, if you can apologise and take it down immediately, and say, I'm sorry, then you earn brownie points and you earn karma points. And, a lot of when it comes to social media, I think so much of it is karma. So yeah, it's important.
It's really important to be transparent about these sort of things and apologise for mess up. Where do you think it's okay to publish names? Particularly in the case of suspects or anything like that that's going on. There's always, people seem to be jumping the gun all over the place with publishing names for things, or perhaps names of people who've just tweeted something but haven't really thought about how their tweets might be used.
Well, I think it's kind of two different issues. So this morning, the suspects' names, for example, they came out first in the New York Times, and we were trying to check them and verify them and trying to see what other media was using them. And then I think in the end, enough people were talking about them that we weren't confident that it was something that we would put out just as us, but we said, New York Times is reporting this because that's a very reputable media source. And I think that issue of transparency is important, because if we said the New York Times is reporting this and then gave the names, and then if later that's not right or that has gone wrong, we can then say, those reports were incorrect. And I think we just have to be quite honest with what you know and what you don't know and what you're trying to find out. I think people appreciate that. The fact that we sort of said, we are trying to find out the names, I think people respect that.
Do you think enough organisations are saying we can't actually verify this, and being completely transparent to say, well, we know this is true, but we can't be sure about that? Do you think there should be more in that kind of, almost like a traffic light system of, we've definitely verified this, but we're not sure about this one, or that absolutely no way?
I think a bit. I don't think you want to be saying that's absolutely no way, we're not sure about that, but we're going to tell you anyway. I think that's a bit of a risky game. But I think,
bunking it.
Yeah, Channel 4 News is quite it's in quite a good position because our Twitter feed it's not like the BBC, where the BBC is so straight and so much, not a machine, but kind of quite robotic and so big that it sort of everything it does has to be kind of straight down the line. Whereas we have to be, we have to keep that trust and be a big media organisation, but we can say a little bit more like, oh, we're just trying to check this because, it could be coming from one of our reporters. We retweet our reporters quite a lot, and they're proper personalities on Twitter, like Alex Thompson or Jon Snow, saying, I'm just trying to find this out, I think is fair game. I think people like to know that.
Yeah. Do you think there's different expectations of different audiences? So like maybe the sport audience would be slightly different about the use of things or sharing something?
Yes, I mean I think there's also the difference between, say, a live blog when you're trying to update things very quickly and immediately. Again, you have to be completely transparent. I was reading our live blog earlier when there were things coming through from the Boston Globe or CNN, where we would say it's from the Boston Globe or CNN, and there's a difference between that and then the final edition of a newspaper, which will be on people's doorsteps or newspaper the next day, where you perhaps want to step back and take a considered view of what's gone on in the day and only be sure of what you're reporting. And the live blog is a bit more cut and thrust. You accept that you always want to be right and you want to be transparent, but you accept that while the battle's raging, one or two things might not be 100% accurate. But as long as you're kind of honest with the audience and say this is what a reputable news source is saying, and that's fine.
Did you want to, you were sort of nodding like you wanted to add something to that?
I was listening.
So thinking also about permissions and all that sort of stuff, do you always ask, or do you think people should always ask to I don't know, quote somebody in a live blog, or do you think it's just too quick, just pulling content in?
Yeah, well, when it comes to quoting people, I think to sit it in a public sphere, you just have to get on with it, don't you? Really? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I was going to tweet that.
Do you think, this is another question from somebody asked for questions earlier, do you think that ethics and standards can be imposed, and is it perhaps naive to expect people in trade to come up with them or to create their own? I mean, do you think you can actually say, do this, don't do this?
Well, we do. We have a code of conduct. I'm sure it's the same for everyone. I mean, if I was to go and, say certain things on my Twitter handle or in the Guardian space, then if there was a line, you know what it is, you know what you're supposed to do, you know what your rights and responsibilities are. It's no different, doing this job than, if you're a postman and you need, 10 envelope out and walk away with the £10 that, someone's posted to their granddaughter. I mean, you know what's right and you know what's wrong in there. And those grey areas there, discussed clearly in our sort of what you can and cannot do document that will get shown.
We have a slightly different code as well because Channel 4 News is a broadcaster, so we're bound by Ofcom as well. And we try and, whilst actually officially we're not bound by Ofcom online, we still try and operate under, the fair balance side of things that broadcasters have to do in the UK. We try and do that on the website and Twitter and all that kind of thing. So,
talking policies, what are your policies when you have cropped up your corrections policies? I know, Tom, you've got some funny stories of things that you've corrections that you've issued, but...
I think basically, corrections are good because, well, obviously they correct things, but corrections are a way to ensure you're fallible. I think you go too far. I think the sort of New York Times publishing a correction to a correction to a correction, while sort of not correcting howling mistakes it has made in the past is kind of weird, because when you say we said Oxford University, we meant University of Oxford. You're kind of saying this is the size of mistake that we make, and so really trivial things like that, I think that's kind of silly. But I think having kind of general guidelines rather than really strict policies for both corrections and for social media is a good thing. I can't remember which news org it was. I think it was AP. Someone issued some very, very detailed social media guidelines last year for which they were ridiculed, because if you're going to issue really detailed social media guidelines, you're going to have to change them every 10 minutes when a new platform comes along. So we have quite a lightweight set of guidelines that say if you are out there on social media, then the main rules are you're not allowed to reveal any inside information about. So you're not allowed to say this piece of mine in the Economist this week was savaged by an idiotic editor, and the original version is much better, and it's here on my blog. So that there's clearly sort of not revealing inside information, not about your own employer, not bringing it into dispute. And those sorts of rules can then be actually applied across any social platforms that come along. With corrections, similarly, I think it's important to be transparent, and it's important also to be, or basically not to make readers look like idiots. And the reason I say that is that if you make a mistake and then a reader points it out and then you correct it, but you don't acknowledge it either in the comments or by appending a correction, then the reader looks idiotic because they say, how can you have got this wrong? And it's no longer wrong. So I think those sorts of rules are the sorts of things you need to apply, and then that then can be applied quite broadly without having to have very, very precise specifications for how you respond to a particular situation.
Have you got guidelines or thoughts about how you can get the corrections out there? Because obviously everybody's happy to maybe tweet something that's
well,
incorrect.
the really egregious ones obviously go in print. I mean, if we make a mistake in print, then so we have a sort of threshold, which is this an egregious enough correction that so, for example, there's a special report in today's, we get the name of, we say, Arup, architecture company, and we call them Arup Associates. So we've changed that online. Are we going to print a correction in print? Of course we're not. I don't think we've acknowledged that one online, and we would only acknowledge it if someone in the comment thread to that article had said, oh, you've got this wrong. But that said, we have occasionally actually promoted our corrections, and there was a case last year where one of them was quite rightly written about. So we had done a piece about drinking cultures, saying that in Europe, drinking at lunch is for business people is much more normal. In America, they kind of get a lot of funny looks. And we went so far as to suggest that people who work for Business Week weren't allowed to drink at lunch at all. And we mentioned this in the piece, and then someone from Business Week said that actually this was incorrect, and there was no such policy. So we then issued a correction saying that, sorry, we got that wrong, we must have been drunk on the job. And this got picked up and written about us, and in fact, so in that sense, we can have a sense of humour about it. We've got it wrong, but we're prepared to admit when we've got it wrong, and it's kind of fun for Business Week and it's fun for us.
I think for us, we're a much smaller organisation than anyone else here. We're quite a scrappy startup by comparison, and we don't really have a massive, document with a million different points that everyone has to abide by. A lot of it is very much common sense, and kind of has evolved from the corrections culture of blogging, because we're very much a blog. And but I think that what's healthy is that the kind of blogging corrections culture has evolved over time. There was a time maybe 5-10 years ago where bloggers were very militant about the way they corrected things, and you would have entirely struck through paragraphs, and then something else rewritten, and then an update at the end. I got this, and this wrong. And if you do that, I mean, that's great, that's honest, and that's good, and that's transparent. But it makes the article completely unreadable. And if you went to that extent where every time you got someone's name wrong, you struck it through and replaced it by the. It's transparent, but it's not useful for the reader, and so we very much. It depends on the mistake. If it's someone's name wrong, we'll just correct it, and not draw attention to it. Just correct it and move on. If it's a factual error, again, if it's just they're based in London when actually they're based in Birmingham, a lot of the time, especially if it's only just gone out in the last hour or whatever, you change it and move on. If it's actually a huge mistake. At the other end of the scale, and this is very rare. Where I can only think that I've been with the Next Web Movement 4 years, and I can only think of 2 times where we've published something and then it's just been completely wrong. In those cases, we definitely don't take it. That's one of the only rules we have. We don't take posts down. We absolutely do not take posts down. If we have messed up. You've got to stand by that. Yes, we messed up. So in those cases, yes, we have struck through massive amounts of things, and then at the top, but we believe this. It has since proved to be wrong. We're very sorry, and you just move on, and you might get a bit of a few annoyed tweets and emails and things for a few days, and then people move on. Yeah.
You mentioned striking through stuff. There's always been these discussions on Twitter whether you should delete. Obviously, not delete because you can speak of it. Or maybe they should come up with something that could be a strike through to say, this has been retracted now or corrected. So, do you have a corrections policy on Twitter to say correction, or do you ever take things down?
I don't. But I would, if you get something slightly wrong, then I think you just go back in the next. I mean, the only time I'm taking something down is I've got a wrong URL or something like that, and then I will go and say, sorry, I posted that wrong URL, here's the right one, or something like that. Again, I just think just being open, being honest, being transparent, and just doing what you expect others to do. Really, it's just quite straightforward.
Do you think it would be at all helpful if Twitter did have some sort of a function that would take a tweet back or to say this has subsequently been corrected? Because once it's out there, it's very difficult to reach all the people who have retweeted it or have believed it to be true.
It ruins the purity of Twitter, I think, to an extent, if you make it too complicated. I mean, there's argument, when they created the native retweet, there was a retweet button, and it actually retweets with the original tweeter's face and everything. A lot of people hated that at first, and I kind of lots of people like, it's ruining the purity of Twitter. You should write RT and then the name, and then and
then they made it impossible for you to copy and paste the tweet. So your URL stopped working. Yeah, I know what you mean.
Yeah, so I think if there was some kind of retraction thing, I think that would be confusing, maybe to an extent, overly confusing. What we probably do at the next one is if it comes from our main account where we've got however many 100,000 followers, and we. If it's just gone out and it's slightly wrong in a spelling mistake, or there's actually a factual inaccuracy in the way we've framed the title of the piece, then we'll delete it and replace it. If it's been, I think there's a time frame where that's kind of acceptable, or that's what we feel anyway. And then if it's got to the point where it's maybe 15 minutes, I don't know what the comfortable level is, whatever feels comfortable, then you've just got to go and replace. You've got to tweet it. And say correction, or manually write a tweet, because when we click publish, it tweets automatically with the title. So then we might manually tweet saying update or correction, and then add more and frame that. And yeah, the original tweet will be retweeted, but what can you do? Like say, it's poor form to delete.
I wonder whether Twitter might add something that lets you not retract, but mark a tweet as retracted, or attach a correction, or something like that. I wonder whether they'll do it just as a defensive measure, because the rules in some countries that require you to run corrections or apologies in a similar part of a newspaper or to similar size or whatever, if they started to have that applied to them, they might need a mechanism like this. And I think it would be, I don't think it would be a bad thing actually. I think if they could say, well, we have a mechanism that allows someone to say that something that was widely retweeted was wrong, I don't think that would do them any harm.
I like the idea of attaching a correction or something, but I think if it was a retraction, it might be like, when people send an email and then you get that little note saying, retracted this email. At which point I'm always like, whoa, why do you want to send that? So it might be a bit like that. You get loads more interest in it if you issued the retraction.
Yeah. Thinking of the retweeting and all those things, crediting sources and linking out to sources, I think we should sort of discuss that a bit, and policies for doing that. Do you think, certainly on Twitter, I personally think that one should always credit one source, and that people are increasingly not bothering. I see people sort of passing stuff off as their own.
No, I think you should always retweet. I think it's part. It's not just good housekeeping. I think it's good also for. I think when it comes to SEO, if you have articles with lots of links, or not too many links, but a few links, then that's good for Google likes that. And I think also, again, it's the whole transparency thing. I think you get the link zealots like Jeff Jarvis as well that want to, want every other word to be a link, and then you go too far. But at the same time, if there are significant sources, you should use them. I mean, I always remember my first job interview at EMAP, which is going back 15 years ago. And I was fresh in journalism college. And I was really fresh-faced, I had a horrible purple suit on, and I met the kind of managing editor, and he said, so, what's the most important things about journalism? And of course, journalism, we taught it speed and accuracy, so I put it up the party line. And he went, what else? And so I kept going and going and going, and all the other things. He went, yeah. The most important thing is the reader, always the reader. And I think that's true, whether it's radio listener, whether it's TV viewer. And I think when you are publishing a piece, so I've written a 2,500 word piece on my favourite tomorrow's Guardian, but there's a few links in there which I think will help the reader. Similarly, when I have a column on Monday's Guardian online, when it goes online, again, if there are significant links that I think will, I don't want to kind of repeat what I might have written in the previous article, I can just link to it. I think that's just, again, you're helping the reader, you're being transparent, and I don't see why you wouldn't do that.
Yeah. When it comes to tech blogs, what's interesting is some approach the idea of, let's say you've got a story from somewhere else and you're kind of reporting what someone else has reported. Some will have at the bottom source, and so they won't mention where they got it from all the way through the article. And at the bottom there's like a formal section that says source, and it says where they got it from.
And that way they could say, oh, we linked to your piece, but actually they just ripped it off. Yeah.
Well, to me personally, I don't like that. What we do is we will very much say, you know, in the first paragraph or maybe the second paragraph at the very latest, according to whoever. And to me, I find that I'm more comfortable with that. And to me, hiding it, almost hiding it at the bottom, feels wrong to me personally. Although other sites, I don't know, maybe it's a commercial decision. Maybe it's a commercial decision not to want to look like you have to source from other places. I honestly don't know why they do it, but to me, I think it's better for the reader if you're in the body of the text itself, it says nice and clearly where you found that, because then the reader can go back and they can find for themselves, you know, have you added any value? Which that's important. Yeah.
We have different rules for printed online. Essentially, there are only two kinds of article. There's print pieces and there's blogs for us. So the blogs we link very liberally to other people because it's part of a discussion. So you know, Brad Llewellyn said this on his blog, and here's a quote of it, and this is what we think. So the print articles have to stand on their own in print, and we then don't cover them with hyperlinks online. And part of the reason is that we want the print articles to be comprehensive and to stand on their own. And we think the hyperlinking to things is sort of saying, reading this piece is not enough to understand. You need to go and read all these other things as well. And what our readers want from us is, look, I just want to read one piece that tells me what the hell's going on here. So we don't. The only exception we make to that is if there's an IMF report or an Economist has issued a paper, then we might do that in a footnote. But that's because we do a footnote in print. And we've had companies saying, oh, you've done a piece on us, will you link to us? And we say no, because as soon as you start going down that road, then everyone is going to want that, and then you know, it's just going to be a forest of hyperlinks. So part of it, I think, for us is that we want the pieces that we publish, the print pieces, to be, even if they're print pieces that appear on an iPad or online, we want them to be self-contained and not a forest of links. But on blogs, it's totally cool, and you know, those are the rules of blogging.
And you mentioned adding value to stuff. Jeff Jarvis was tweeting earlier on, as he did, I think, during the conversation. Yeah, how about that? He said BuzzFeed adds no value, only animated gives the Boston story. How would you respond to something like that? Anyone? It's always a responsibility to add value. I mean, it's the essential question, isn't it? Is that part of the guidelines? Or?
Yeah, I mean, look at BuzzFeed. A lot of the time, the value they add is packaging, and I think that's that's definitely value, and you can see that in the traffic and the success they've had there. But at the same time, whenever I mention BuzzFeed on my tweets, I have a particular person who follows me, and I know him, and he immediately replied with, they just steal images and stick a source link underneath and a funny comment next to it. And he's very much grouchy about that. And I suppose one person's value is another person's.
Well, they do get a lot of stuff from Reddit, don't they? So a classic BuzzFeed thing is to find a Reddit discussion of, you know, pictures of subject X, and then they'll make a post called 19 unbelievable pictures of subject X. And I think they got a bit better about this, but essentially there were very often, you know, Reddit discussions where you could see exactly where individual posts came from, and people thought that was not on. But when people are holding up Reddit as the arbiter of all, I mean, Reddit is great. I love Reddit, but you know, it's part of the fun of Reddit is the anarchy. So you know, these are. You can't say who's right and wrong here, but I do have some sympathy that they could at least have said, oh, by the way, we got this from Reddit.
But BuzzFeed aside, I think shallow reblogging is the is where you're completely void of value. You know, we definitely never do that. We don't like the idea of saying, oh yes, this has happened and this person reported on it and blah blah. If you want to do that, fine, but just have like a sentence and say you can read about it here. If you're not going to add any value at all, even the value we add might be just the insight of the author who can add some context to it, and that's fine. But shallow reblogging for hits is horrible.
But that's, you're ignoring, I think, commercial realities there. For example, say if the Daily Mail published a story from a reputable journalist that Footballer X was off to Real Madrid, let's say it's Gareth Bale, and they've got exclusive. Clearly, every other newspaper or news organisation would rip that off. And they would not just do the Jeff Jarvis route, it would be, let's just link to the Daily Mail, because that would be stupid. You know, your story that could get 300,000 or 400,000 page views could earn us quite a lot of money, etc. and so on. You know, I think he's been a bit of a Puritan in Babylon when he says things like that. So I think there are some grey areas there, but I think every news organisation would rip's the wrong word, you try and add value clearly, but if it's just a news story and the news is this, you add value outside the news story. You rip off the news story, but then you will have your chief sports writer or chief football writer writing about Bale going to Real Madrid. You'll have our Madrid correspondent talk about what he's like to find Madrid, and you'll speak to other footballers that have made that trip to Spain. So you're adding value there, but you're still taking the original story and ripping it off essentially.
I think like Channel 4 News, because we have been, historically, a show which is on at 7 o'clock for an hour, compared to the BBC or Sky, who are on all day, all time. They get all the stories first because they're 24-hour news operations. Like we always have to have a reason why you want to watch Channel 4 News at 7 PM, and that has to be because you're adding value. Like people want to know how Channel 4 News are going to cover that story, rather than just the story itself. And now, in the same way, in the digital world, it has to be kind of the same. It's, Channel 4 News is not really, if you're looking for massive breaking news, while you will get it from us, you actually want the Channel 4 News take, or you want to know what Lindsay Hilson thinks about that, or you want to know the extra kind of, what's happening here about that. You want that extra thing, so we're kind of a lot about that. And we always sort of say, very cheesily, depth and attitude is what we do. Sorry, everyone, but that's what we always want to add value, basically.
That's great. It's part of the job, isn't it? Filtering and
not always managing it, but we always want to.
Filtering the news from the noise. Thinking of filters, actually, one of the questions that often comes up is the use of filters in photos, like Instagram filters. Do you think that's kind of deceptive? Do you actually publish pictures on Instagram? You're smiling at the end there.
This whole question of whether any manipulation at all is permissible. But I remember the heyday of the Independent and its Herbie Dobbs and the amazing amount of burning in he used to do on the skies, and that was part of the character of the newspaper. So there is that kind of it's permissible if you could have done it in an old-fashioned dark room, but anything more than that is and that's kind of a funny rule. But yeah, I know. I mean, we've had photographers get in trouble, from in Afghanistan and things where they combine multiple pictures. I mean, by we, I don't mean the Economist, but there have been cases of that where that is sort of something you couldn't have done in an old-fashioned art room is not on. Instagram, I'm not sure. Do news organisations often use Instagram? I'm not sure if you do.
I think it's part of the medium. I think if you're using Instagram, filters are part of what Instagram is, and so people would expect those images to have filters. And I don't think it's necessarily dishonest to say, here's an Instagram photo, it's got a filter. So I don't think that's...
They just look horrible, that's the problem. I mean, for God's sake, people use Visco or Snapseed or something. I mean, the basic Instagram filters are... And so there have been some really nice photo essays from Afghanistan done with Hipstamatic. Just Hipstamatic's really irritating because it's so slow. And you can't retrospectively apply its filters to pictures. But that's interesting because that's like an aesthetic in the same way that very grainy black and white photography is an aesthetic. And as long as you're upfront about this is how it's been done, I think that one's all right.
Do you think it's okay then if people would say this was using a filter, that it's a question just of transparency?
Actually, you do see this. I was looking on AFP image, whatever it's called there. I was looking for a picture of something the other day, and they had Instagram pictures, and they said underneath, Instagram picture of something or another. And so they were really straightforward about what it was, and so you can see why it just looks horrible. That's the problem. That's why I wouldn't use it.
It's just horrible.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, again, going back to the weather, there's a difference between a picture of the sunset that someone's taken and they've put a filter on Instagram, and something in Afghanistan, and whether someone's doctored the picture. They're so far apart that we're totally fine with someone sending in a picture on Instagram and then putting it in our live from newsroom feed and saying, isn't this pretty? It's got this filter on the sunset, but it's a different. I think it's a different issue.
Yeah, I suppose there's some grades, aren't there? It's grades of photoshopping or retouching, as they might say. I think it's probably heading towards the time when I should be asking all of you if you'd like to join in with some questions, because I'm sure you've got lots. Oh, look, already very keen. This is great.